Hi, hope you're doing well. Today, I hope and plan to talk about trauma in Ovid's Metamorphosis. And so last time I got to talk about trauma in the Odyssey. And again, like it helped me to say up front there, um, I don't have expertise in trauma. I have experience with trauma. I have PTSD. I have expertise in poetry, so this definitely isn't any attempt to try to do anything therapeutic. Um, it's looking at where I see trauma appearing in works of poetry that I've gotten to read, gotten to study. So, and also, I guess places where I've seen what could be called post-traumatic stress disorder in those works of poetry. So, before getting to the Metamorphosis, it helps me to talk about a work of Ovid's that came before that, the Heroides. I don't know if that's the Latin pronunciation. It's my pronunciation. Because I believe that there are some ways that approached what today could be called trauma, that kind of helps set things up for the Metamorphosis. Maybe not just for the readers, but for Ovid. And so in the Heroides, Ovid wrote poetry, what could be called dramatic monologues, from the perspectives of women in literature up to that point who had not been featured in their own works of literature, but who had been portrayed as I'm trying to think of the right way to put it. They were depicted kind of alongside male characters in literature, men in literature, who were, the main focus of these works a lot of the time, and who were the stars, maybe? I don't know if that's the right way to put it, but the first example, the first poem from the Heroides gives, to me, a really good example because it was written in the persona, from the perspective of, and the voice of, Briseis. And Briseis was a character who appeared early in the Iliad as a female slave of Achilles, and she had been taken from her father and basically made Achilles' possession. And then part of the conflict in the early Iliad came from her being stolen, again, like a possession, from Achilles by Agamemnon. So she didn't really have a voice in the Iliad, so much as she was contingent on, subjugated by these powerful male characters. And so Ovid wrote in her voice. The whole poem was her getting a chance to speak and getting space to speak in. And so there, in another poems of the Heroides, there were these examples of what I would call trauma victims speaking and having the floor, having all the space of the poem to speak in. Medea was another one who, another one of the voices in the Heroides, one of the speakers of one of the poems, and had been presented as a villain for what she did to her children, but in a way could be seen as one of Jason's victims. Dido is another one from the Aeneid, and others. So these female characters across the Heroides, who might be considered trauma victims, trauma survivors, got to speak. And after the Heroides, Ovid wrote the Metamorphosis. And of the dozens of stories that comprise the Metamorphosis, I believe many of them could be seen as depicting trauma, potentially traumatic harms. Rape, murder, abuse of different kinds, generally happening to vulnerable people at the hands of more powerful characters, usually the gods. So in the Metamorphosis, there's story after story of these supremely powerful gods victimizing people, often violently, for their own gain, or their own desires. It's the opposite of kind of a loving God relationship. These are abusers. And so the harms that are depicted could in themselves, I believe, be called trauma. But then what I've learned with my own experience with PTSD and trauma is that it's a psychological response, an emotional response within someone. And so it's possible for a harm to be traumatic to one person and not to another person. The kinds of harms that are shown in the Metamorphosis might be considered some of the most common harms for people to find traumatic, or, harms that are often found traumatic by people. And so just like in the Odyssey, how Odysseus, possibly having experienced trauma, may be suffering from post-traumatic stress, went into a very strange series of experiences that were not what might be expected. Just like that, these metamorphoses are these victims of these terrible harms being transformed into non-human creatures and things. So there's a series of strange transformations that happen as a result of these harms. And the transformations in themselves tend to be dehumanizing, like I've learned that trauma can be. In the Metamorphoses, it's very literal or very metaphorical. Daphne is changed into a laurel tree. Europa is changed into a bull or a cow, and other human characters too are changed into non-human entities. And to me, that could be a powerful metaphor for someone's internal experience of post-traumatic stress. It could be a way of representing how PTSD is manifested in some of the people who have it. This sense of things kind of going wild in ways that aren't predictable, in ways that kind of change things fundamentally for the person, as in the Metamorphoses, the appearance of this new animal or plant or whatever it is that comes out of the transformation could be said to represent a change in nature, fundamental change. And definitely, again, the fact that these former humans, having been terribly harmed, are no longer human after that. So the ways that they're transformed, literally or metaphorically, dehumanize them. And I believe another powerful way that Ovid's stories in the Metamorphosis could represent the experience of someone with PTSD is that there is humanity retained within this kind of dehumanized whatever they become. So there's, to me, the really emotionally resonant, powerful depiction in more than one story of the Metamorphosis, where the person has been changed into an animal, and they're unable to tell anyone else their reality, their experience, who they are, what's happening to them, or what has happened to them. And in the Metamorphosis plots, it's this kind of way that the gods use to silence victims, so that the gods won't face consequences. It also, to me, represents one of the ways trauma can severely harm within, which is to create this barrier between who the person appears to be to people on the outside and what they're experiencing inside, and what happened to them, and the emotional responses and mental responses that continue to come from that. So maybe the most, poignant, powerful, terrifying example of that is Actaeon, who, after doing something that offends one of the gods, is turned into a deer and is killed by his own hunting dogs. So, as a human, he had his own dogs that he hunted with, and presumably deer. I can't remember for sure if that's they were shown hunting deer specifically in the poem, but once he's been changed into a deer, naturally they see him as prey. So he was their owner, their master maybe, but he's run down by them. And to me, that's a powerful representation of what can happen when someone who's been victimized by potentially traumatic harm tries to say something about it. They end up maybe re-traumatized, preyed on for coming forward, for doing that. And there are many other stories in the Metamorphosis. And what I'm talking about is one of the kind of threads in it, or maybe more than a thread, because it's quite a few stories that show what could be called traumatic harm and transformation following it. But it also helps me to stop a moment on historical context, because I believe that it's trying to think of the right word. Likely that in more than one way Ovid was talking about abuses of power by rulers in Rome, maybe elsewhere too, because by then Roman conquest of other places had been going on for a while. And Ovid, by that point, had been conspicuously distanced from kind of anything like a political or ruling position in Rome, I believe. So he was fairly upper class, and he'd been trained, at least up to a point, legally, in some kind of a legal capacity. But he had left that for poetry, and his poetry for a while had been what might be called edgy. And, I mean, at some point, even though it wasn't openly about people in power, it really came directly against what people in power stood for, or vice versa. Specifically Augustus, the second Caesar, second Roman emperor, who was very puritanical morally, and like with maybe most other things that he did, I mean, he was the original fascist dictator. What he thought was right, everybody had to do, or else, basically. And so Ovid had written a lot of poetry that in a lot of ways was about defying convention, and self-liberation to some extent, at least independence. And then he wrote what would come to be kind of his masterwork, this massive poem, considered an epic by some, showing over and over and over and over and over again that what the powerful people wanted and tried to force on, or what the powerful characters, gods in the poem, but I'm guessing he was talking about powerful people, that what they tried to force on other people could be not just deadly for the people they forced it on, but dehumanizing. And it was after that that Ovid was exiled by Augustus to a place called Tomis that basically, from a Roman perspective, from what I understand, it was a punishment to be sent there. Not just because it was far away from Rome and it was difficult to stay connected to people there, but because of it was seen as a pretty unpleasant place just to be, landscape-wise and in other ways too, I believe. And so after having written this massive, powerful, I mean, it would end up being a powerfully influential poem, The Metamorphosis, he ended up having to live for the rest of his life isolated because of Augustus's disapproval. Ovid wrote about that disapproval as coming from Carmen et error. That's my pronunciation. A poem and a mistake. And from my understanding, it's thought that the poem was The Art of Love, Ars Amatoria, or maybe the Amores, the poetry that was describing the kind of liberated sexuality, liberated approaches to sex. I believe it may have also come from him writing this amazing, massive poem showing the horrible abuse that could be done by powerful ruling characters when they decided that their will was all, that other people needed to follow it no matter what. And here was the emperor doing just that. And I believe it could be argued that without Ovid's Metamorphosis, there wouldn't have been a Shakespeare as the Shakespeare we've experienced. The greatest genius of English writers. Some might say. I believe that's how he's seen quite a bit. I don't know if there's any really way to measure that, but I believe it could be argued that Ovid was Shakespeare's favorite writer, and I'm pretty sure it could be argued that Ovid wouldn't have been without the Metamorphosis, because that's, I believe, what Shakespeare drew from in Ovid's writing. And I believe that's all I've got. Thanks.